So I work and teach in Nogojiwanong, which is a Anishinaabe Pamoan for the place at the end of the rapids. And there's the river there, the Otanabe, is the river that beats like a heart. And so introducing the start of a course to my students, we have the practice of the land acknowledgement. I'll often talk about traveling from Toronto to Nogojiwanong and being a kind of vessel that carries water, thinking back to Nate's talk just now, from one, like kind of upstream actually, from one place, the lake, back up to the Otanabe watershed. So the title can stand. I think I could basically use this title anytime I talk about any energy paper. I do have a chapter I was going to sort of pull from to talk about, as it says in the program, the oil road. I'm not going to do that, but if you're interested in that travelogue, shoot me an email or ask me and I will send it to you. I have the chapter. It's a bit more schematic. When I went back to it on Thursday to prepare my remarks for today, it was a bit too schematic, and I have another thing in mind for us. So let me start. Oh, I guess I'm not counting that as any of my time either. So I don't think I'll be too long. My sense of energy humanities and petrocultures research is that there's still no unifying methodology or archive. The critical work of petrocultures was first largely to bring together research on energy with critical approaches from the humanities. Core argument is that the continued use of fossil fuels could be traced to political, economic conditions, sure, but the petrocritical intervention, the energy humanities intervention, insists that ours is an energy culture as much as it's social or economic. An early example of such work can be found in Stephanie Lemenager's Living Oil, which explores the affect of oil culture in everyday life in the United States, while a latter work, such as Jeff Diamante's Terminal Landscapes, connects fossil fuel cultures and landscapes through the figure of the shipping terminal. My interest has been to trace connections from cultural forms to future possibilities. For instance, when writing about the aesthetic textuality of oil, I proposed that, and this is from this piece I just mentioned, oil aesthetics are not limited to the representation of oil, nor do they solely seek to express the interconnected systems of fossil fuel powered circulation and distribution of aesthetic objects, nor do they solely name the writing upon and within the earth of millions of miles of gas and oil pipelines. Oil's aesthetic textuality encompasses all of these things: mimesis, artistic production, and infrastructural rewriting of the Earth's surface. Fossil fuels provide the basis for the aesthetics of human artistic production, even as they reproduce systems of economic production. Our use of fossil fuels has transformed normative expectations about daily life, education, health, sustenance, shelter, and travel. Much ink has been spilled about its omnipresence, history, and future. I'd like to use my time today to introduce a historical novel from 2024 by the novelist David Hubert that thinks about the future of oil from the 1860s and from the 1980s. Hubert sets his work in Petrolia, Ontario. In 1857, James Miller Williams of Hamilton began distilling some of the tar lying around oil springs, located a few kilometers south from Petrolia. After buying the property rights from Charles Nelson Tripp, then in July or August 1858, he struck an oil deposit in Oil Springs while digging a shallow well, kicking off the oil industry in the region. The jerker lines set in motion nearly 170 years ago are still swaying and creaking today. And this is a moment where in Titusville, Pennsylvania, you also have this sort of bursting forth of and harnessing of oil at the same time. So my talk, which is about to begin now, starts with an epigraph from Amy Riddle's Petrofiction and Political Economy in the Age of Late Fossil Capital. But petrofiction is a combination of a material thing, petrol, and a social object, fiction. And the petro part of the word does not define or specify fiction. Instead, the term petrofiction seems to indicate that a thematic of petrol, drawn from the content of the work, is awkwardly projected as the form of the literature, which has led to certain problems of interpretation. So these remarks can fall also under the heading of narrative distillate. As an academic concern, petroculture is over a decade old. An important moment for the academic on the subject of petrocultures and energy cultures is the already mentioned dossier edited by Patricia Jaeger, appearing in PMLA in 2011. This is a text that continues to inspire work on the energy unconscious and ongoing revisions of periodization. The 2012 date of the inaugural Petrocultures Conference indicates a clear moment of legibility for the field of research. Of course, its roots reach deeper, and the question of how to understand and represent energy cultures may be as old as those cultures themselves. The gathering of scholars such as Bob Johnson, Stephanie Lemenager, Imre Zeman, Jennifer Wenzel, and Sheena Wilson, among many others, and the call for new programs of reading, these entry points are now well known. The pursuit of research related to energy cultures has now had years of PhD projects, granting seasons, and conferences. That's kind of my point here. The scholarship is advancing and developing. The time to argue for its core relevance has passed. So what should petrocultures research do now? This line of inquiry animates my remarks today. What can the formal dynamics of theory-informed creative writing do for understanding fossil fuel culture now? How much might this narrative distillate have to offer in the struggle against anthropogenic climate change and the ongoing devastation wrought by capital's oil habit? My hunch is that petroculture scholars may need a reconsidered approach to interpretation and critique in light of narrative forms that are already keenly aware of the energy unconscious, and indeed, such forms may be described as working to make said fields of force, to quote Jaeger, legible from the start. So what happens when literary works take on the project of criticism from the beginning? What do we then do as critics? African studies scholar Amy Riddle was well ahead of me on thinking through this problem, as the epigraph for the talk today, my talk, makes plain. In that paper that I referenced, Riddle offers a succinct account of the category mistake. A label such as petrofiction makes, quote, when petrol as commodity is confused with petrol as material, the narrative weighs down in description of the material and natural world. Riddle reads Helen Habila's novel, Oil and Water, and Abdelrahman Munif's Cities of Salt through Marxian literary critic Georg Lukács's analysis of naturalism and realism. Quote, the reified observer of naturalism notices and describes a scene, whereas the narrative of a realist work participates as it narrates the vicissitudes of human beings, in part by transcending mere observation and description. In realism, this transcendence involves the depiction of setting as something inseparable from its relation to the characters and vice versa. And Nate, I love setting. I think it's very, yeah. I know you have to be, you gotta like riff and make a joke, but yeah, I get it. When energy is thematized by interpretations of narrative content, readers might understand character and setting proximate to oil. Readings that approach petrofiction as a genre tend to be more interested in how oil becomes, quote, the organizing form of the novel, close quote, which on Riddle's account hides social relations behind a resource-determined story world. Riddle puts this problematic most succinctly here. Quote, when the commodity form is represented as nature, the social relations in the commodity form disappear. In this scenario, exploration for oil extraction, upgrading, refining, transporting, and consuming, it all become natural outcomes of human life rather than political economic choices that require constant labor. This paper considers the transcoding of academic writing through creative writing using David Huber's work as a focal point. Huber, a scholar and creative writer, developed a focus on animal studies through an emerging interest in petrocultures while completing his PhD in London, Ontario. He's now an MFA mentor at University of King's College, Halifax. Huber has 2 books that take energy and specifically fossil fuels as a central concern. So there's Chemical Valley from 2021, which is a collection of short stories, and Oil People, the novel from 2024. And I would argue these form a tight duology, upgraded and refined within the critical frame of petrocultures. In both texts, Hubert focuses on the region in Western Ontario where oil wells were drilled at around the same time in the late 19th century as those in Titusville, Pennsylvania. As the title suggests, the short story collection Chemical Valley describes the lives of characters who live and work in and around the upgraders and refineries of Sarnia. Meanwhile, the novel Oil People, set in Lambton County, and follows fictionalized versions of historical figures in the region. Today I'm going to focus on the novel. Oil People is a historical novel. It sets part of the action in the late 19th century and uses a framing narrative to follow a descendant of the initial well drillers in the 1980s. Hubert has talked about the reasoning behind the decision. For him, it always keeps the present in mind as there is the time we're reading in the novel, reading the novel in to consider. So setting it in the 1980s, looking back at the 1860s, we're also thinking about like 2024, 2025. Setting the more contemporary story in the 1980s keeps things technologically simpler than they might have been if it were set today. There's also some important cognitive distance involved. In a sense, the 1980s moment offers some historicity as a moment that readers can connect with their present. Oil Springs, Ontario is a real town in Lambton County where John Henry Fairbank founded Fairbank Oil Company, which is the oldest oil company in the world, and put his invention of the jerker line to work. The American oil driller and businessman John Shaw produced the first oil gusher in Canadian history in January 1862. A second oil boom happened in the 1880s when a deeper well was discovered. And Fairbank's jerker lines are still at work today. And Andreas Rutkowskis has a visual art project called Petrolia, where you can just go to his website and watch the jerker lines at work. Subterranean passages in the novel tie the 1980s to the 1870s. The 1980s focal character Jade Armbruster is a teen and the descendant of Clyde J. Armbruster. So here we have the names switched. These aren't based on the actual historical figures directly, but are kind of analogs. Armbruster is a well digger extraordinaire. Jade, amid spending time with Mark from the pig found down the road, watches over the family's museum about oil discovery in the region. Hubert uses the conceit of an attuned and thoughtful teenage character to present fantasy sequences that connect the two moments across time. So to say that it's a historical novel is only partially accurate. Oil People deploys some stylings of what my colleague in cultural studies, Alison Kloosterman, writes about as the eco-Gothic. Hubert works sections in that are clearly from Jade's perspective, though they exist outside of the plot, like a wave of memory or a character-driven free indirect discourse. So here's a long quote from page 19 in the novel. "The smell of it, that's what stays. Every time I'd go to school and come home, I'd smell it fresh again. There are species of smell. There's thick crude and chunky crude, skunky and sulfurous. There's crude that smells burnt before it even leaves the ground. There's peppery crude and smooth crude, sharp crude and iron-smelling crude, crude that smells like sweat, and crude that smells like blood. But there's nothing I've ever encountered out in the world, nothing else that smells like oil. It used to make me think of where the line was between the natural and the synthetic, the given and the made. Maybe it's in the smell of it burning, because there's smoke and then there's smoke, and when you smell plastic or diesel burning, you know it right away. If all smells being invisible are ghosts, then this odor is an inbred phantom, a wrong-made body whispering the ballad of what wasn't meant to be." Olfactory taxonomy. That's what Jade offers us through her musings. This passage describes a keen sensory wash of living in close proximity to oil in Lambton County. It's not the only sensory experience described by the novel. There's also the creak and sway of jerker lines, which can be heard from Jade's room. These passages happen to be the ones that most succinctly capture my interest and my argument. They sit in tension with Riddle's comments, moving readers in the realm of the not quite noticeable yet fully felt reality of fossil fuels. the novel takes on the realm of the impressionistic and affective reality of fossil fuels. And here I think of Jeff's amazing opening remark yesterday, the quote from Twain of the not quite known but the already known, sitting in that tension. Here, fossil fuels as objects jostle against their status as social relations. Consider this type of writing exemplary of fiction's narrative capabilities. The fictional account is localized and deeply embedded in the character's psyches and internal monologue. Moreover, readers can understand and appreciate things even if the characters don't have the full picture. I mean, what else are we doing in a novel that has two timelines? These are inaccessible in lived reality, these two timelines, yet fiction makes them available in tandem. We make meaning by imagining these two historical moments together and are left with the impression after reading that they were always somehow meant to be in conversation with one another. Fiction develops new styles in order to adequately represent social phenomenon. Returning to Lukács, one finds compelling commentary on Hubert's work. Quote, readers experience events which are inherently significant because of the direct involvement of characters in the events and because of the general social significance emerging in the unfolding of the characters' lives. In speaking about the novel, Hubert emphasizes that these originary well drillers were not after oil because of what it might have meant for development, extraction, settlement, or wealth. Instead, they were taken by the problem of it. And that's really well characterized in the novel. They're just out there, Armbruster's out there every day trying to solve the problem that isn't a problem for economics yet. It's just there's something in there and I want to get it out. There's just a fascination. How to get the oil out of the ground, where to drill, what were they capable of, and how might they accomplish this feat? The novel represents these men in this way. Caught by some sort of wild import, they continue to delve into the muck at the expense of their families and health. And Armbruster is trying to, the Armbrusters are trying to have a child and having no luck as they go through. Let's cut back to Jade. The family drama of the 1980s plot revolves around whether the Armbrusters will sell their land. They have an offer from an agent, it's a secretive buyer. The family is middle class, they have the museum and a house largely in disrepair. There's a scene where the whole family is feeling down and the father comes back from a trip to Walmart in the US with a ton of tape cassettes and soda. Jade and her sister just grab the tapes they want, take them to their rooms. These plastic objects we know are petrocarbons. We know most objects we encounter today, ready to hand, are made of fossil fuels. Oil People doesn't spell this out, but it doesn't have to. Instead, it shows us these two versions of Oil People. In the 1860s, 1870s, Armbruster struggles to get oil from the ground. In the 1980s, you can still hear the creak of the jerker lines, but the world has moved on from this site of oil, though not from fossil fuels themselves. These are Oil People because of the cassette tapes. Oil seeps in different ways, too. But this is also an oil family, guarding the past, watching over the museum and the land, holding on to a past of settler discovery and importance. What would selling the land mean? What do the buyers know that the Armbrusters don't? Leaving the land behind might mean a transformation from one kind of oil people, oil barons or oil lore keepers, to mere oil people in the sense of consumers, gas guzzlers adorned in plastic. I will share a kind of plot spoiler to close out my comments, but I think it's important. It turns out that Jade is not an ancestor of J. Clyde Armbruster. Because Clyde was having difficulty conceiving a child with his wife, the American developer secretly stepped in. We learn through the historical plot that the Armbruster legacy is a false one. This is important because it emphasizes how history is not shaped by lineage, but by circumstance or contingency. It's not inevitable. What ties the family to this place is the museum on the one hand and the land on the other. There's more to say about family lineage as a ruse in the novel, especially if we think about the fragmented approach to mapping Sarnia's social and toxic space in Chemical Valley. And just in closing here, I'll say, my reading here and my interest in this is part of my personal inquiry into what petrocritics can do now. That I have a vested interest in this, though honestly, I wonder how much of it has to do with moving on from being an early career researcher, getting involved in petrocultures, to sort of looking back and seeing okay, well, I've seen where we've come so far, but I'm not quite sure where to go, especially as we witness how capital's fossil habit has like gone from slowly to much more rapidly impacting our lives. I'll leave it there.